Good evening and welcome to Nox Mente. Tonight's guest is author Eric Wargo. Eric is a science writer and editor with a PhD in anthropology from Emory University. He has a professional background working for organizations and government institutes conducting archaeology, psychology, and neuroscience research. In his spare time, he writes about science fiction, consciousness, and the paranormal at his popular blog, The Nightshirt. His first book, Timeloops, was published in September of 2018. It is currently number 14th, the 14th, whatever, in Amazon's occult parapsychology category. Eric, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited about this, and as I've already told you, I binged you today.
Well, you can't overdose. Be careful.
Yeah, he's like
Not
smoking.
on these subjects.
It's like smoking pot. You can't
Right.
can't overdose.
So let's just jump right in and get to the early you in your life. What are the things that stick out now, looking back, that seem that connect you to the outer world? So pop culture, movies, cartoons, those things. And did you have a relationship with nature?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, as far as pop culture stuff, I'm a child of the '70s. I spent my and I was not like running around the neighborhood playing with the other kids. I was in the basement rec room, with the wood panels, in the beanbag chair, watching Star Trek reruns. I mean, every single day. So, I mean, you can understand me, I think, really well, just having that picture in your head of brown corduroys and velour shirt in a basement rec room watching Star Trek. That's my childhood.
That sounds like a Catholic schoolboy childhood.
Yeah.
It's of my era too, and I can picture it completely.
Yeah. Yes. So, but as for connection to nature, absolutely. I grew up in the foothills of Colorado, and yeah, my parents were a little unusual, I guess. They were both psychologists. Well, my dad was a psychologist. My mother had a master's in psychology, and she didn't work actually when I was a kid. But we would, they had very esoteric interests, and they got into geology and rock hounding. So every weekend we would go out fossil hunting and gold panning and stuff
So they
like
were
that.
geomancers.
Well, it was they didn't have any occult interests. It was just kind of just love of being outdoors and love of nature. So
Oh, that's awesome.
so yeah, nature and Star Trek are two big things for me.
Were you brought up religious at all?
No, not one bit. And yeah, my father was a ex-Catholic. He sort of left the church as soon as he left home and never looked back. My mother was just, she really didn't have a very strong religious upbringing, and my parents, they were not atheists. I mean, religion just was not talked about. We just didn't really have a connection, and so yeah, no religious upbringing whatsoever. But that it made me, and I don't feel like I was missing anything, but it left me with an interest, certainly, in religion and spirituality, or what I would now call spirituality. And when as soon as I was a teenager, I was already reading, I was reading about, Buddhism and mysticism, and I gravitated to kind of the spiritual but not religious thing, I think, like a lot of my generation. And and certainly, sort of had a connection to that my whole adult life, even though it wasn't really part of my childhood. But I would say my spirituality as a child was that kind of what I call the scientific sublime, that I associate with people like Carl Sagan. Like I think that one of the big I'd have to say one of the big religious experiences of my life, or formative religious experiences, was watching Cosmos. In 1980. That series every Sunday morning was just like incredibly powerful, and still is. In fact, I just started rewatching it with my 3-year-old daughter.
And I have to say that Carl Sagan's version's way better than Tyson's.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no comparison.
Yeah.
Absolutely none. And that was a great series.
Yeah. I'm a big Carl Sagan fan, which is not necessarily a popular position among a lot of the people in the paranormal sort of world, but I think he was a skeptic in a good way, not a skeptic in the bad sense, like Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I think
Right.
he wasn't beholden to the scientism that we see today.
Exactly.
Did you form ideas of what like Godhead was at this age, since you weren't, luckily you weren't indoctrinated into anything? What were that you can recall now looking back? What were your ideas of that? So you're listening to Cosmos and you like sci-fi and all that. Were you forming ideas of what it could be?
Not explicitly, but there was always, looking back, yes. I mean, I think, the science fiction of the 70s that I grew up with, there was something holy or sacred or something that was in there, and and I could never put my finger on it, and now that I've gone back as an adult and sort of revisited all of that, I now see what it is, and I write about it, and I really view it through the lens of Zen, my Zen practice. I mean, I ultimately gravitated to Zen, and that's sort of been my, if I had to call myself anything, I would say I was a Zenist, and I really see. I see Zen as kind of a science fiction religion, sort of. It's incredibly minimal, incredibly portable. It sort of fits into those kind of sci-fi worlds that I associate with the paperback book covers of the 1960s and 70s. Sci-fi paperbacks. I just somehow I associate it with that, and I think it has a lot to do with the kind of Japanese aesthetic that you associate with Zen. But there's some harmony there. And Mr. Spock, that was, I'd have to say, if I had a model for a spiritual person that I wanted to be, it was certainly Mr. Spock. And it was a long time before I, learned that in fact he was sort of inspired by his Judaism growing up, and his sort of creation of that character came out of things he observed in the temple. But to me, it seemed like a Buddhist. I mean, he meditated, was very kind of stoic, very compassionate. That seemed, that I think translated really well to my later. I think that probably more than anything else led to my later embrace of Zen, I would say.
I love Spock too. That is, and also what a gift that you were able to freely come to these things on your own without having anything, kind of forced down upon you. So many get that experience where things are forced on them as far as religiously.
Yeah, absolutely. I have this conversation with my wife a lot about, we sort of discuss whether we feel like, she had a sort of a secular Jewish upbringing, so that she went to synagogue, but it wasn't, it was kind of, there wasn't a lot of really religious, belief and practice. It was kind of more, more for the tradition and so forth. And she asked if I feel like I missed out not having that, and I don't feel at all like I missed out. And I feel like, just as you say, I feel actually very fortunate that I didn't have um, some kind of dogma that was, that was being forced upon me. I also had very open-minded and encouraging parents who sort of encouraged the seeking mentality, and I think I just, that enabled me to sort of find what I needed when I was older.
Yeah, I had the same thing. My parents were open-minded and nothing was forced down, which now allows me in my adult life, it's also allowed me to look at everything really with curiosity. And
Yeah,
so there's no hangover with anything.
right.
Um, what about so back in those early days, do you recall having any typical fears or atypical fears, the something under the bed, the darkness, all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the first time, well, Bigfoot was was just terrified me. I, I, I think the first, yeah, I'm sure that the first movie my parents took me to was this like wonderful early '70s documentary called "Mysterious Monsters: Bigfoot" by Schick Sun Films. I'm trying to think of the name of the guy who narrates it. It's slipping my mind. But anyway, it's a really wonderful documentary with these really scary reenactments of these Bigfoot encounters, and it just scared the pants off of me. um, yeah, I was scared of Bigfoot my whole childhood. Fascinated, but scared. Uh, I think I had the usual fears. Um,
You can say shit. It's okay.
okay. I was wondering. Yeah, well,
So
it
just
scared the
on
shit
that,
out. It scared the shit out of
I was wondering, so on that even stand, and so some of these things I feel like I kind of know because I've binge listened to you and I enjoy your book and all this, but this is, it's kind of an autonomous thing, this interview or chat. But so where do you stand on Bigfoot now? The whole phenomena.
me. Yeah. Well, I'm still a believer, and uh, but it's not something that I've really delved into heavily. But I did actually have a great opportunity to hang out with Jeff Meldrum a couple years ago at a Society for Scientific Exploration meeting, and you had lunch with him and stuff. And I just, his presentation and stuff really convinced me. I was very compelled by the evidence. So I have, I would say, 90% a Bigfoot believer, and kind of a boring Bigfoot believer, in that I, kind of tend to think it's an undiscovered, hominid species. I don't,
Yeah,
I
you're
know
not
a
an
lot of people.
interdimensional guy.
I'm not an international guy when it comes to
Yeah.
big, but
I can tell I didn't even think they were real. I didn't think much of them, and I had a very visceral experience with it, and I can tell you it was very real. And it was
really,
one of the scariest things ever in my life. And so now I'm one of those complete believers in it, where
oh,
before it was just in that murky,
right.
whatever
Where
state.
was this?
This was over here where I live in the Pacific Northwest, over by Mount Hood. I was really remotely camped
Hmm.
and had, my dogs and another person with me. So so that's a witness who is a staunch, uh, he just was not a believer in that stuff. I'm a believer in lots of stuff, weird stuff. I
Hmm.
love the woo, but Bigfoot was not on my radar at all.
Right.
Now there are places I won't go, and if I get that scent, the very first smell, it's kind of hormonal, I won't move further into the deep
Wow.
wood. In fact, I actually kind of leave the deep wood alone now.
Yeah.
Like the
No,
really
that's
remote areas.
You said deep wood.
I know. I grew up with the British people around me, so wood rather than woods. Uh, yeah. So now I'll go to I'm in the forest every week, but there's a depth of it I won't penetrate because I feel like it's not. There's a feeling I get. I guess it's a better way where I feel like this is remote enough.
yeah. Mhm.
And
Wow.
because my
Yeah.
experience, it was not a welcoming experience. It was a definite fear experience. And the person I was with, got the audio experience in his head and it growled and it was definitely get the hell out of here.
So it was. Did you see it or was it?
Yes,
Oh,
I saw it with
wow.
my own eyes. And you talk about this a lot anyway. One of the things that is my mind wanted to turn it into other things, right? My
Yeah.
mind wanted to turn it into a bear.
Fair. Yeah.
And I've been around bears a lot, especially up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and I always seem to live, I live in remote places. It was not a bear. The form wasn't a bear. The smell wasn't a bear, but my mind still wanted to convince me
Right.
that, oh, logically, this is what it is.
Yeah.
So,
It's amazing. It's amazing that kind of warping of your experience around these things that culture just doesn't make a place for accept. It's incredible the kind of self doubt that it can
yes.
provoke after an incredibly compelling experience. That nevertheless, give it a few days, you can very easily start to doubt. Yeah,
Yeah, I will. I now, I absolutely validate the experience. I know what I saw. I know what I actually felt, which
mhm.
was very in my body, visceral, and then it was very hormonal. The back of your jaw, hormonal, where
Uh-huh.
I don't know how to describe that.
Right when you said hormonal, I pressed enter on a message in chat that said she had some kind of hormonal response.
Jerry, there we go with the
Dr.
synchronicity.
Synchro at the helm here.
So back here uh in the past here, what was your relationship with the dream world and how did dreams play out for you as a young person?
Yeah, I would love to remember because I remember dreams even when I was a little kid, but and I remember a few dreams from when I was really small. Um, so dreams were part of my life, but I wasn't. I didn't know what to make of them, and I don't think I talked about them with my parents. Uh, so I remember one of my father was a psychologist, and he had like lots of pop psychology and human potential books on his bookshelf. This would be another kind of formative thing for my childhood. My dad was an obsessive book purchaser, like I've become, but unlike me, he never read the books he purchased. So he had just like bookshelves full of these, popular like pop psychology and human potential stuff, which was very popular at the time. But he wouldn't read these books, but I would read them. And I remember one book was by Anne Faraday called The Dream Game, and it was sort of I think of a bestseller, in the mid '70s probably or late '70s, and that was super interesting. That was probably my introduction to kind of basic dream psychology. I've actually always meant to go back to that book and see what she says, but I so like that was a kind of milestone, and I thought about dreams a lot, and I definitely noticed them, but I didn't know to write them down, until much later. I don't think I ever wrote a dream down until after college, probably.
Well, this is part of what we are always pondering here is how transient things are. Memory, dreams, the past, it's all meshes together. But within that idea, and in context to this conversation, you did just mention that you might have a memory of a couple dreams you had when you were little. Do you mind sharing the images that stick out?
Sure. The the what I think of as my earliest dream was of a was that I was living with my mom and dad in a red caboose. It was a red train caboose, and it was in this kind of just big flat kind of desert, but marching across this desert very slowly in every different direction were these plants. They were kind of like yucca plants, sort of, and they marched slowly across the desert. And I knew, maybe because my parents told me or warned me, but if the plants ever touched you, you would die. And so this image and this dream has always stuck with me, and I definitely know the sources of the dream now. The plants. My mom was obsessed with cactus and succulents. She had, the house was full of cactuses and succulents. So I'm sure at some point, she warned me about not getting too close to the cactuses or they'd hurt me. So I'm sure that that's where that idea you die if if these plants touch you come from. And the plants looked like some of the sort of succulents that she had around the house. And the red caboose, I only later, when this was, I don't know, probably 25 years ago, I was driving up to we have some mountain property in northern Colorado, and I was taking this back road to the property that I hadn't taken since probably I was a kid. And along the road up to this property was a red caboose, an old red caboose that someone had hauled up this dirt road and was living in, or had lived in, by the side of the road. And I figured that must be the source of that image. But yeah, that's probably my first dream. I also have a memory of a dream that maybe was, I don't know if it was a nightmare, but a very scary dream of being left at school in the evening. I think this was during preschool, and having a dream that nobody came and picked me up, and I sort of was there at night, and there was no one to pick me up. So I remember that too. But I don't know which of those was the earliest dream.
I love the image of the plants marching. I think that's very dynamic.
Yeah, I love it. I tried to write a story about it once. I have a million science fiction stories that never got anywhere.
That's a good image to put into something, though.
I had like a flash of Fantasia with organic Fantasia.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Which just reminded me of a book I read a while back. I think it was called Deus Ex Machina, but not the same one. It was about a virus that was, it was like a GMO insect that got accidentally out into the wild and turned all the immune systems of the plants up like 10 notches. So they started producing tons of pollen and all kinds of crap, and everyone like died from a cold, basically.
This sounds actually plausible.
Oh, it totally was. I'll look for the book, but yeah, that reminds, because the plants were kind of marching in that.
Oh, really? Yeah.
That's interesting, Jerry. I'd not heard that. So back here in your youth a little bit, this idea of dreaming, was there, and this is in conjunction with where you are now, but has your dreaming life the landscape of your dreaming life change since then? And what I'm looking for is, did in your younger life when you're dreaming, so not just these first dreams, but or just earlier you, color, sensate stuff, all that, has it been steady or have there been changes in the dreamscape for you?
Oh yeah, there's been radical changes over the years. I mean, I would be interested to sort of talk to others, dreamers, about this. So yeah, I'd love to know your experiences too. But it's certainly, for one thing, it changes definitely with sleep quality. And uh, as I've gotten older in my in the lab over the last, uh, I would say 5 6 years, my unfortunately my sleep quality has gone down because I've developed sleep apnea and all these problems that come with age, and uh, and as sleep quality declines, so does dream quality, or at least dream recall. So I don't remember. I don't remember nearly as many dreams, or as many details of my dreams as I used to when I was a younger adult. Um, and there are exceptions, and every now and then there's an exception where, like, wow, I'm able to, like, write a couple of pages in a journal describing all this great detail, and it's really interesting. But unfortunately, those rich, really, uh, you know s- full of symbolism dreams, are less frequent for me, now that I'm in my have just started my sixth decade. So yeah, but I don't know if it's, I suspect, I don't know. My hunch is that dreams are metabolizing our experience, and so my hunch is that they're going to naturally change over the course of life. For one thing, because our experience changes. Um, there's that aspect of, um, dreams as, memory consolidation, as involved in learning, and for most people, as we get older, we have less that we need to learn. So I wouldn't be surprised to find that a lot of people, as they age, have less and less vivid dreams. Although I don't know. I don't know if that's true or if that's been verified. Um, but but yeah, definitely my dreams have changed over the years, and the quality has changed. Um, I don't know. I mean, what are your guys' experience as far as that goes?
For me, I think it's been pretty consistent. When some of what I hear you saying is like possibly connected to like neuroplasticity,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And but I still dream as vividly as ever,
Mhm.
and uh, although I can say that depending on what's going on, of course, because it's so interrelated, if we're, as you already mentioned, if we're under stress events or not enough good sleep, where we just go into deep sleep and pass REM, and just the
Mhm.
body's trying to heal in any way it can.
Yeah.
Uh, Whatever is going on with that, it definitely changes. I've set my life up to be as stress free as possible,
Mhm.
so I get really good sleep.
Yeah. Well, part of it for me is I have a toddler, like,
Yes, yes, you're
which kind of, like, like, say goodbye to to
yes.
quality sleep. And also, I was going to add, I don't know how much of this, when any question about dreaming or your dream life, what you're really talking about is dream recall, because we don't,
Yes.
we're all dreaming theoretically 2.5 hours a night, and so part of it is what we remember later. So I can't really say how my dream life exactly is different, but so I may be just talking about my dream recall. I don't.
Well, this was something I wanted to get into you. I'm glad I binged you today because I've listened to you as you've done interviews along the way. However, doing it today, some of this is fresh for me. And I'm wondering where you are with the idea of, I'm asking us more for the sake of people that may be listening to this, than because I feel like I kind of know where you're going, uh, where you are with synchronicity in the dream experience and how we harness it through recording of the dreams when we wake up.
Right. Well, recording is, I'm sure you would agree, is crucial. I mean, that's
Yes.
you're not going to be able to work with your dreams if you're not writing them down. Uh, the As far as synchronicity, I mean, and this is something I get into a bit in the book and on my blog as well, is my approach is thinking of it in terms of precognition. That we are precognizing constantly, and especially in our dreams. And we're not aware of it. I mean, this is under the this all belongs to the realm that Freud called the unconscious. So it's not available to conscious inspection directly, but nevertheless, it guides us. And because it's guiding us, because we're being oriented toward certain rewards and certain outcomes and certain discoveries in our near future, we have these experiences, which we call synchronicity, because that's what the term that Jung gave us. Uh, but I believe that this is, that there's a tendency to think of synchronicity as somehow the word, some, you know, uh, archetypes that exist outside of us, stage managing our lives to bring us to certain points for our edification or whatever.
That's not our definition.
Well, that was Jung's sort of definition, and that's certainly not what I think. I mean, I think it's a reflection of our own unconscious precognitive guidance system, and that when we're really cooking precognitively, we're having these experiences which feel like meaningful coincidences, but basically we're just in touch with our precognitive guidance system. So that's how I sort of define synchronicity, or how I think about synchronicity.
But you also talk about it that it has I don't want to call it a back end component, but a second component, an entangled portion, that the retrocausality causing a synchronicity.
Well, retrocausation is the kind of physical principle that enables precognition to occur. There are two sides. They're just sort of two aspects of the same thing.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Retrocausation is a more physical. If I were talking to physicists, I would be using the term retrocausation, because they're thinking in terms of particles and and interactions and and it's there's always in physics been, or not always, but since for about the last century, there's been this idea that well, maybe causality doesn't just go in one direction, and on a physical level, and but we're just now, or I say we, I'm not a physicist, but physicists are just now able to sort of design experiments.
You stayed in a Holiday Inn last night.
And find that, it's starting to look like, at a very basic, at a quantum level, causality isn't what we experience, on our daily life level. But the idea is that certain things like brains can scale up this quantum retrocausation principle and enable what I'm calling precognition, which I'm just using that as an umbrella term to subsume not only things like premonitory dreams, visions of premonitions and presentiment, what in literature and religion is called prophecy. All these ideas of seeing, feeling, or somehow being influenced by experiences ahead of us in time.
Right. Right. I was incorrect saying they were connected. I was thinking about precognition.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was something you'd said. Well, I kind of got what you were saying, that this is just not a tangent, but it's related. That the precognition is really the psychic effect, basically, that you, or the whatever, it's the imprint in the future that you remember in the past.
Yeah, it's just memory in reverse is my hypothesis. And it's a hypothesis based on looking at kind of all the data that we have, not just kind of laboratory experiments, but all of the what's denigrated as anecdotal data, the sort of non-repeatable kinds of experience, powerful but non-repeatable experiences that you and I may have frequently or infrequently, and that are abundant record of this in literature, and that goes across cultures and across history. I mean, it's an incredibly prevalent phenomenon and experience that our culture just rejects.
It's been beaten out of us and burned out of us.
Right. And it's rejected so much that a lot of people, just have no awareness whatsoever of this kind of thing going on in their lives.
No, it's cool. No, you'd brought up, I just want to mention for people who are listening, if they have a hard time dealing with the thought of this, is to watch the movie Arrival.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's a good demonstration of this concept.
Exactly. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better demonstration. When I saw it, I did not know what to expect. I saw it, I think, the opening night, and just because this was supposed to be a really good science fiction film, I was like really excited about it. First contact, story. So I thought, yeah, this is gonna be great. And wow, when the sort of precognition stuff came into the movie, I just had chills, because I'm working on a book on exactly what they're showing in this movie. And the funny thing is, the stories about precognition or time travel they act as kind of attractors for precognitive experiences. So after I saw the movie, I realized, oh my God, I'd precognized this the previous day in various ways, and everyone that I talked to about the movie had similar uncanny experiences around the movie, But yeah, that's a great film.
Those are synchro swarms, we call them.
Yeah, synchro swarm. Yeah, right.
Can I ask another question, Ish? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, of course.
So how do we separate remote viewing from this phenomenon?
Right. Well, that's a great question. I won't say a position. My guess, my strong suspicion, and the hypothesis that I'm kind of pushing, even though I can't, say it. I can't, be 100% sure.
Your current thinking.
Yes, my current. Thank you. My current thinking on this is that there is no separation, and that remote viewing is really precognition. And again, this is an idea that's not new. This goes back to even the 1970s at SRI, when they were developing remote viewing. Jacques Vallée, the ufologist who was one floor up from the SRI folks. I mean, he would have lunch with these guys.
Shenanigans.
Yeah, and he would have lunch with these guys and say, "Well, how do you know that clairvoyance, remote viewing is not recognizing, what you're going to learn later about, what your feedback back
Mhm.
essentially. And this is an idea that's been there from the start. But it's kind of not been the favored view. And sort of it's easier to think of remote viewing as, your consciousness, somehow traveling across space and seeing a distant, sight. It's a lot harder to wrap your head around the idea that what feels like, traveling out of your body and visiting a distant site is, actually just getting kind of a preview of the feedback you're going to get later. I mean, that's just harder to kind of wrap your head around.
Mm.
But my current thinking is that that's what's going on with remote viewing. And even the SRI researchers acknowledge that feedback played a very important role. The question was whether it was all the story or just part of the story. So I'm of the small camp that says it might be the whole story.
So I've had kind of a background theory that out-of-body travel is a intense form of remote viewing in a way,
Mm-hmm.
which throws a whole nother wrench in that. Lucid dreaming then is somehow connected to this.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I've had some I'll tell you what gave me sort of what strengthened my view on this was some of my own lucid dreaming and out of body experiences. And I haven't had a lot of the latter. I've had a lot of lucid dreams. I've had a few out of body experiences as an adult. Actually, really, just I think 2 or 3.
Just 3 more than
But
me.
all of them, well, yeah. I mean, it's not easy. I had them spontaneously when I was a teen, actually. But it's one of those things that as you age and you like, oh, I'm really interested in this now. I'd like to bring one of those on again. And yeah, the instructions make it a lot easier than it actually is. But those experiences turned out to be, and I write about this on my blog, those experiences turned out to be in-body experiences later. So they were like, essentially, I think of them as video quality precognitive experience.
Yeah,
And
could be.
I've had also lucid dreams that operated the same way. So I sort of think of this as possibly a continuum, of kind of vividness of precognitive experience. But what you said somehow reminded me, um, one of my one of the first things that clued me into this, and this I also write about this on the blog, I think, that uh, I back when I got started studying ESP research. This is probably, I don't know, it was probably 8 years ago, 9 years ago now. I think like a lot of people, I thought, well, I'm going to try this myself, obviously. And so I had my wife print out sort of pictures when she was at work, put them in envelopes, okay, and then I would try to remote view them. When she brought them home at night, I would try to remote view what was in the envelope, do a drawing, and then open the envelope and see if I was right. And I was not very good at that. So then I had the idea, well, I'm going to let my dreams um, play a role. And so she gave me an envelope, a sealed envelope with a picture in it, and I put it by my bed, and I just went to sleep. Okay, and then in the morning I woke up and I recorded, the only um, dream I could remember. Well, this dream, um, uh, it was about it was about like a charismatic sort of military commander who was, um, on this very sort of idyllic, in this very idyllic landscape, and there was a bunch of people around him who had very dark tan, and they somehow he wanted to get them to leave this place, and they didn't want to. And and then at some point he pulled out like this walkie-talkie or some sort of phone, and was communicating with a ship that was the ship wasn't visible in my dream, but the ship was like some port somewhere else, and the ship was somehow under attack. Okay, well, I had this dream anyway. Okay, so I pulled out the picture over breakfast. I opened the envelope and pulled it out, and it was nothing like my dream. It was like just a picture of a hand gesture, a specific hand gesture, the two hands sort of with their palms open. So it seemed to have nothing to do with my dream. And I just chalked it off as a failure. But then it occurred to me to free associate on the hand gesture and in the picture. And the first thing that came to mind for that hand gesture was a specific old Star Trek episode. Okay, it's an original series Star Trek episode called The Apple, and it's basically the Enterprise goes to Gilligan's Island, where it's this, they go to a planet, and I realized all of a sudden when I made that connection, I realized, oh, that was what I was dreaming. The dream was enacting the whole scenario of that Star Trek episode, which was about the Enterprise visits this planet, and there are these kind of very tanned natives, and the planet's controlled by this ancient computer with a stone head god, and they're sort of feeding this god, and they're sort of kept in this state of they're kind of it's that god is kind of like an archon, it's they're kind of in this they have no spontaneity or whatever in their lives, and Kirk, and the Enterprise are trying to destroy this thing to sort of liberate them from this. And meanwhile, the Enterprise is under attack by this robot. So I realized, oh my God, I was dreaming about something associated with that hand gesture in that picture. But then, in order to sort of confirm and remind myself about this episode, here's the key. I then immediately watched the episode. I queued it up and watched it. And then as I was watching it, I realized that my dream was not about the picture in the envelope. My picture was about what I was doing the next morning to confirm this remote viewing hit that I'd had. I was precognizing watching this Star Trek episode in a kind of state of excited glee that I'd had this, really cool, what I thought of as a remote viewing hit, but was really a precognitive experience.
It was actually an associative or associated remote viewing hit.
Associative, right? Yes. Yeah.
I heard you talking about this with someone, I don't remember who, but using it for financial gain fails remote viewing, at a good rate. But with associative remote viewing, it works much better. And to that end, Dick Allgaier is doing it with cryptos right now. He's got a YouTube channel. So they, I think, I forget exactly how they do it, but they'll have two different pictures. That they'll show if the market goes up or down, and then they'll have remote viewers look at those pictures.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm sure that associative remote viewing is certainly the way you would capitalize on this for, in order to predict, real world outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea if it's successful. I'm not following it, but I just thought it was interesting. So I don't. Okay, right. Nish, I'm done. Sorry.
No, Jerry, those were, as you know, those are all things that we ask, and I want to underline we.
No, I know. I just didn't want to monopolize your time.
Well, it's our time. With all this, can you give us a couple ideas, Eric, on some imagery on some lucid dreams you've had, the couple you've had?
Well, I've had a lot of lucid dreams, and the most vivid and striking precognitive dream I had was a lucid dream. And this was a little over a year ago. It was in January of 2018, I believe. And most precognitive dreams, in my experience, require a little bit of free association. There's a kind of associative thing. I don't have very many. They're just vividly the thing, the scene or whatever. But this was, I was flying over this landscape, and it was sort of a prehistoric landscape. And as I descended, I saw some creatures. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be so cool. It's going to be like a Jurassic Park kind of thing. These look like dinosaurs. Like, wow, I was really excited. Anyway, as I landed between these two creatures, and they were really they weren't the exciting dinosaurs I was expecting. They were very kind of nondescript creatures that I sort of associated with, the period before the dinosaurs. There's like kind of at the beginning of your dinosaur book when you were a kid, there'd be, some kind of, vaguely reptilian, vaguely mammalian creatures kind of were just not very exciting, and you're always more interested in the dinosaurs later. Well, there were a couple of these, okay? But they were very vivid. One of them was sort of scaly and lizard-like and kind of squat and evil-looking, and the other one was kind of more like almost like a saber-toothed tiger, kind of, but more like a dog. Sort of I don't know. It was kind of hard to describe. But anyway, I landed right between these two creatures, and I had to keep them apart because they wanted to fight. So I'm like holding them apart, sort of desperately with my hands. And there's this weird detail. There's like the one of the creature on the left had a laser pointer, like a laser dot, like right on its head. And I want to know who was targeting it. Like it was like a hunter was like targeting it, but I couldn't turn my head to see who that was. Okay, well, anyway, so I woke up and I wrote down this dream. So that evening, I checked the mailbox, and I was, surprised and happy to find the first issue of this magazine that I'd subscribed to a couple months before, but I hadn't gotten my first issue yet. And it was a magazine called Prehistoric Times. And it's sort of a fan magazine about dinosaurs and dinosaur collectibles and dinosaurs in art and stuff like that. It's got a little bit of paleontology, but it's also kind of more about the pop culture aspect of dinosaurs. Anyway, I got it because I discovered it at a museum in Colorado when I'd been out there earlier, and I thought it was pretty fun, and I sort of wanted to reconnect to my sort of childhood filled with dinosaur models and stuff. And so I subscribed to it. I also like showing my daughter pictures of dinosaurs. So anyway, so I got the first issue, and I didn't know it was coming. Had no idea what was going to be in the issue or anything. Anyway, so I'm thumbing through this issue, and I turn the page, and boom, there is the scene that I was in my dream, and it's the exact creatures that I was sort of keeping at arm's length. They were trying to fight. It's like it was exactly the same scene, and they're facing each other, and they're about to fight in this scene. And I learned that the creature on the left was called a Scutosaurus, and the creature on the right was called a Sauroctonus. And anyway, it was very strikingly like just I didn't have to do any a free association to realize that these are precognitive. But there was that element of the laser dot, which was not in the picture. And I sort of like thumbed through the rest of the magazine to see if, there was something like that I might have kind of been precognizing, and I couldn't find anything. So finally it occurred to me, well, just, free associate on it. What's the first thing it reminds me of? And it's like, well, boom, the first thing that came to mind was the Terminator. There's a scene in the Terminator. I hadn't seen the Terminator in decades, but one of the scenes that's always stood in my mind is, Arnold Schwarzenegger, going through the bar, and there's a laser dot on Linda Hamilton's forehead. And I thought, oh my God, what is the Terminator but a time traveler who's hunting a creature in the past? right? And I realized, oh my God, I'm the hunter. I was the hunter in the dream, targeting, this creature, looking at my dream journal, and excitedly with this copy of the magazine open in front of me. I was the hunter. So that laser dot was kind of a representation of what I was doing right then, like what, 12 or 14 hours after I'd had that dream, which was going back, to my journal, and excitedly sort of discovering this precognitive hit. So that was a very vivid, lucid dream example. But yeah, it's precognitive dreams are almost a daily experience, but they're not as usually as vivid as that.
That's fantastic on many levels, and it definitely brought forth several questions. One of which is, this is a good point to introduce what you're postulating in the time theory of the block,
Hmm.
and how that plays into here, because a lot of people would read, and I think popularly, a lot of people read these things in quite a different way when they're self-analyzing.
Hmm.
So, will you introduce a little bit of that, of your theory,
Yeah, sure. It's not,
into
and that's,
that,
yeah,
using that?
sure. It's well, it's not my theory, and this goes back to Einstein. It really goes back to Einstein's teacher, Hermann Minkowski. After Einstein published his special theory of relativity in the uh, early part of the last century, his teacher Minkowski is the one who really sort of put this together, that or the implications of Einstein's theory for uh, the idea that space and time can't be separate, that they're part of what he called a space-time continuum. So the term space-time really goes back to Hermann Minkowski, and and the way what he argued was that you have to think of space-time as this big four-dimensional block. Now we can only think in three dimensions, so but just sacrifice one of those space dimensions, and just imagine that one of those dimensions in this block, this three-dimensional block, one of those dimensions is time. Okay. Uh, and the idea is that basically that all events are already there in this big four-dimensional block, and that what we think of as an object or a person or a dinosaur or whatever is really a world line. That is to say, it's a sort of a worm that snakes its way a certain distance through that block. And what we experience at any given moment, what we call the now, or the present moment, is really just a cross section of that block. And sort of you can think of consciousness as kind of this, I like to think in terms of a video editing program, and consciousness is kind of our cursor, that kind of scrolls across the video editing timeline. It's not it's a crude metaphor. We know that time isn't really like that, and consciousness isn't really like that, but still it's a kind of a handy way of thinking about it.
That's a common a view or practice of some Hindu culture. I forget which one exactly, but they talk about it as it's either your snake life or the snake man. It's got snake in the title.
I've heard the term long body before.
Yes,
and I
that's
don't know
it.
where that comes from.
It's Hindu. It's there, Hindu somewhere.
Yeah.
It's the long body, and it's basically the fourth dimensional view of 3D.
Right. Yeah. And so the idea is, this is partly what enables something like retrocausation, or makes it thinkable. That the future is not. We tend, I think, we sort of habitually think of the past as somehow set in stone behind us, and we're kind of continuously kind of piling on the past, but that the future is just nebulous and open. Well, according to the sort of Minkowski block universe view, it's all kind of fixed. So that's the block universe view, and it's been the dominant kind of, at least tacitly, it's sort of the dominant view for a lot of physicists, and has been ever since then.
Where does free will fit into that model?
Well, this is a great question, and the free will is the big stumbling block for people to sort of countenance this idea of a block universe,
or we don't have it,
or we don't have it. Well, that's what I like to invite people to do, is to simply take their belief in free will, or their sort of cherished notion of free will, and just set it on a shelf.
Yeah.
You don't have to. I'm not asking you to get rid of it, but just see what it feels like not have that piece of baggage. I'll say that I've discovered, I mean, I think most people have a sort of a knee-jerk reaction against this idea of a deterministic block universe initially. But the more that you kind of sit with it and think about it and work with it, it kind of works on you kind of like a Zen koan, really. And in fact, I've found, I had my own sort of knee-jerk reaction to it, but then the more I thought about it, the more it really, I found a lot of depths in this idea that are very satisfying, and it meshes very well actually with Zen. I mean, there's a lot of Zen stories that are essentially about a kind of sort of firsthand experience of essentially the block universe, and so I've come to really love the block universe and love the idea that there's no free will, but you have to sort of have to bring people along gently to that that idea, because it sounds very unappealing initially.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm right there with you. I gave up on that a long time ago. But another way to look at it, which is the way I came to grips with it, is that you are living through a real-time life review.
That's another way of looking at it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
How does the idea of interdimensionality, and I listened to you speak on the idea of multiverse, which you're not pulling up to, but interdimensionality through phenomena like dreams and precognitive stuff through the portal of dreams and these kind of altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, I'm not, I'm not a fan of the multiverse, and I'm not super compelled by multidimensional arguments.
Well, this is why I say interdimensionality. So I wanted to scrap the multiverse altogether, since I know good and well how you feel about that. But interdimensionality through dreams and through things like precognitive experiences within dreams. And so when I say inner, I mean inner, as far as our inner world or whatever's going on that allows us this function through dreams and through the idea and process of precognition.
Well, I'm not certain what you mean by interdimensional, but you mean inner or inter? You mean
inner?
Inner. Okay, inner, right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'll say the great discovery for me in working with all this. I mean, I think when anyone starts going down the path of studying ESP and all that, I think everyone has this idea, oh, wow, it's a superpower or something. You're gonna, you think of it as this enhanced something that's gonna make your life better. You're gonna, be some kind of ninja going through life, seeing the future or something like that. Well, that's the real reward of this for me has been uh, these experiences that put you in touch with your own biography, your own long body, you know, and it's incredibly. I mean, first of all, it's awe-inspiring to just have a precognitive, to recognize that you've had a precognitive dream. That itself is awe-inspiring, especially if you have enough of these experiences that you can start to trust them, because there's this tendency that we talked about earlier to just kind of like sweep it under the rug, because like you just you feel like you can't, that you're you must be making a mistake somehow if you're having this experience. So you kind of have to have enough of these experiences to kind of go, no, this is real, and our paradigms that don't accept it are wrong, you know. But once you do that, it becomes, first of all, incredibly awe-inspiring to realize that our brains are somehow reaching across time. That we are reaching across time, when we sleep, and probably, all in other ways. But it's even more sublime to have these experiences like I had with that lucid dream I told you about, where you realize that your dream included a representation of you looking back at the dream later. That's like this fractal, really kind of sublime thing. It's like looking at a mirror at yourself, but across time rather than space. It's just really very profound to have these experiences. And the more kind of practice, the more you gain insight into your own dream life, because you record a lot of dreams, the more you start to understand your own dreams and sort of understand how they work, and you can start to have these experiences more and more frequently, and it's a profound spiritual experience. And this is what really has come to excite me more than anything else about the study of precognition. I don't I'm I'm not so much thinking of it in terms of a superpower. I think it puts us in touch with our own lives and our self. Self is kind of our biography, our and realizing that there's a kind of a wholeness to our unfolding life, that we can really get this new kind of experience of um, uh, it's very powerful. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, so I'm going somewhere. So if we, through precognitive experience through the dreams, and in context to the block, is it possible to unlock, and I am thinking here a little bit in the Hindu sense and also the Zen lens, is it possible to unlock the full code, for lack of a better word, to get into a space where you've set aside, or you've stepped higher up or lower, however, you've got a distance from the whole experience, and you can see the whole time space thing that you're playing out this drama in? Is this a possibility?
I think what you're asking is something like what uh, Ted Chiang proposes in his story that Arrival is based on, the idea of the way the heptapods in the story see time, and sort of seeing that complete, seeing their life as a whole. Is that
Hmm.
what you're sort of referring to?
Yes. And so, yes, absolutely.
I don't know. I would be skeptical of that. Um, at least in our ordinary, certainly not in our ordinary conscious frame of mind. I may be in an altered state. I don't know, and I don't know what that would look like. But certainly, accounts of of powerful hallucinogenic experiences, for instance, certainly could well be what you're talking about. I don't know. I guess
Have you had any of those?
If we take it, can I follow this for a minute, Jerry? If we take it more into a more mundane aspect of just the basic precognitions you have within a dream, and that tend to be, in my experience, mundane. Coming into a room and realizing, that I have had this dream, I've accessed this at some
Mm-hmm.
point. So if we build upon that, a narrative of which we're, of course, recording when we wake up, or recording our precog experiences, is there a way that we could then discern the larger picture of our personal lives, and get maybe a glimpse of the bigger picture of our personal lives, so through a mundane precognitive recordings? So I'm looking for like the mapping aspect of it.
Yeah, well, I think certainly as you engage in this, what I call precognitive dream work over time, you are definitely getting that mapping of your 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 own life, and at your own life as it intertwines with other people's lives. The really interesting thing is to sort of see um, how your own precognitive experiences connect you to other important people or not important people in your life, and sort of work as this kind of um, how precognition works is to kind of weave lives together. This is something I'm working on right now. I'm sort of collaborating with a precog on this, and she's excellent at sort of doing what what you're describing, which is mapping out her life via her dreams and her dream records and so forth. Give
Yes.
this larger sense of her biography. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And just to follow this up and finish it up so that Jerry can get to the question he had,
I forgot what it was, so don't worry about it.
Dude, you should always write it down. That's why I have notes. Anyway, is okay. So just to wind back around, the out of body experiences. Did you say you have had a couple?
Yes. I had a couple of them when I was a kid, when I was a teen, and just sort of rising up off the bed and sort of flying around my room, kind of things, and I didn't know what to make of them. Um, uh, but because my parents were psychologists, and I was kind of steeped enough in sort of basic, I think, psychological science just from being around my parents, that my belief that I had actually left my body or flown up the ceiling I think was kind of squelched pretty. I was sort of pretty quickly a kind of skeptical voice stepped in and said, well, this is some kind of dream. It wasn't real. So unfortunately, that kind of materialist uh, view kind of squashed any interest in that phenomenon until I was much older. But yeah, I had a couple a few years ago. Well, no, I had one in the late 1990s. I didn't recognize it. I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to call it an out of body experience. That's what, in hindsight, it was. I wrote it down and have all the details of it. And in hindsight, I can tell that it was precognitive of something I did the next day. And then a few years ago, I had a very striking one. I could describe it actually, or I could describe part of it. I had actually been actively trying to induce um, uh, out of body experiences with no luck for many months. But I was sort of trying these tactile imaging exercises that an author named Robert Bruce recommends. And anyway, I had luck one night. I I found myself what felt like I was floating in up near the ceiling of my study, which is about, I don't know, about, I guess, 20 feet down the hall from where I was laying in bed. And it was at night, and I was just like up near the ceiling of my study, looking down through the windows at the street below. And it's just very, very vivid, just crystal clear. Like, oh my god! And I like immediately thought, oh my god, I succeeded, And one of his recommendations is, well, make your flights short, because only then will you be assured of then remembering it the next day. Because you want to, if you're a beginner, you just need to. It's important to remember it, because if you have an out of body experience, you don't remember it, it's like it happened. So anyway, so I followed his instructions and turned right around and went back to my body, woke up. I didn't even make it all the way back to my body. I just sort of turned around and I just kind of woke up in bed. But there was one detail, again, about like this view out the window, and it was strange. There was this green, like a green diode that looked like it was somewhere hovering in space outside the window, uh, sort of between the window and the street somehow. And it was kind of perplexing and a little ominous, almost like it was an electric eye or something like that. And anyway, that was the only sort of detail that didn't match the reality. And the next day, I looked out the window. I tried to see what it might have been. I couldn't figure it out. Well, anyway, exactly a year later, minus I think 2 days. It was like almost exactly a year later. I was in my study in the evening, up on a chair, changing my light bulb in the ceiling, and it was dark outside, and I looked down at the window, and reflected in the window was the green diode of the adapter for my laptop. It was sitting on my desk, and if I had been down lower in the room, I wouldn't have been able to see this green light reflected in the window like that. But because I was up by the ceiling changing a light bulb, looking down, it was like right there, like exactly as I'd seen it in that out of body experience a year earlier. And so I thought, oh my God, it's like, you know, I don't know now. I can't say for sure that maybe my computer was in exactly the same place a year earlier. So maybe, like could have been out of body, but it just seemed to me like, oh my God, this is this, I'm right now experiencing in my body this thing that I saw a year earlier in this, quote unquote, out of body experience. So that was one of the important things I think that sort of clued me into the idea that out of body experiences might be video quality precognitive experiences.
That's a great example. Sorry, Jared, that is like such a perfect example.
No, I don't know what I was going to say, really. I was going to comment on that more, something like that must have really reinforced your belief that would be that it's connected.
Well, it's sort of, at that point, I really wasn't sure. I didn't really have any theory. I was certainly open-minded to the idea. I still am open-minded to the idea of consciousness leaving the body. I don't want to be closed to that. But
I'm not close.
Like experiences like that kind of make me excited about the idea that a lot of things that phenomenologically they feel like our consciousness is somehow leaving our body or whatever, but they may really be a sort of consciousness displaced in time. Because there's and I go into this in the book, but there's reasons why information from that's sort of refluxing from our future. that we would not be able to engage in what's called source monitoring. We wouldn't be able to sort of place it in a context of our sort of autobiography the way we can with memory. Okay, and so it's going to feel, like it's alien. It's going to feel like it's, coming from outside us, or like we're leaving our bodies or something. It's not going to, we're not going to be able to place it and contextualize it. And so, I think that a lot of experiences that people, depending on their belief systems or whatever, they explain it in all kinds of different ways. These kinds of, alien feeling experiences could well be precognitive experiences for that reason, because we can't engage in source monitoring.
Madfinger reminded me what my question was.
Yay.
you were talking, Eric was talking about altered states of consciousness and psychedelic experiences, and I was asking if he had any, if you'd tried any of that stuff. In your youth,
sure.
of course.
I mean, well, one tries things in one's youth. I'm more compelled by the altered states that Zen practice has been able to induce, and in a much more kind of stable and sustained fashion. You can really have quite amazing experience. And in fact, this is another area I have not even started to write about, but I've only started to think about. But I've realized that some of my kind of mystical experiences that I've had in the process of meditation also have been turned out to be precognitive of things many years in the future. At least it's true of at least one experience I had back in when I was first like intensively meditating, like around the year, I think it was in 2000, 2001. It very uncannily matched something on exactly the same day, something like 20 years later. So I'm starting to think that this is a ripe area of exploration of looking at mystical experience as potentially precognitive experience.
Sure, you could even look at some of the psychedelics as control mechanisms to keep people away from using their own natural ability to get into that state. A state which I would argue you control versus one that something else may be controlling. Right.
Well, hallucinogens are definitely, I would say, precognogenic. And this is just from some of the stuff I've read about. I've never tried ayahuasca, but certainly the stories that people tell. Here, I'll give some examples. Michael Harner, for instance, the shamanism anthropologist who studied shamanism and taught shamanism and so forth. He has this story. He opens his classic book, The Way of the Shaman, with his story of his first kind of ayahuasca experience with I think it's the Jivaro in South America. And this experience was like he was seeing this dragon vomiting forth a river, and well, the very next day, he's leaving this tribe to go back to civilization, and he's in a boat with a couple of missionaries, and he tells them about this experience, and they get this like look on their face, like they're kind of dumbfounded, and they get out their Bibles and they show him a passage in Revelations which talks about this dragon vomiting forth a river. It's essentially exactly what he saw in his vision. Now, like I think a lot of people, he's sort of takes this as this amazing confirmation of the sort of archetypal reality of what he'd seen. But another way of reading it is that his ayahuasca experience was precognitive of what these missionaries showed him the next day in the Bible. And when I found that story, I immediately thought, I wonder what. Yeah, I wanted to go back to William S. Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg. Wrote a book, The Yage Letters, which was about their like journey in search of ayahuasca back in the late 50s. And so I got out my copy of their book, and I opened it right to a page where Allen Ginsberg is talking about um, his first experience. Maybe it wasn't. Yeah, I think it was his first experience with ayahuasca, and he's describing these, having this very intense experience about his mother and about um, sort of taking him back to his childhood. And it's very sad. It's about his mother sort of dying unloved in this mental hospital, and it was something that really had been a sort of trauma for Ginsburg and sort of colored his own relationships to women and everything. But then he has an afterthought. He describes going into a bookstore to buy a pencil or buy a pen, I think, to write that letter to Ginsburg to Burroughs to describe it. And he notes that on the radio when he's in that bookstore is this old song that he had loved to play when he was a child, and it's this really sad song. I forget the name of the song. It's from a soundtrack of some 1930s movie, but the refrain in the movie is "Will you love me never?" This woman singing this plaintive thing, "Will you love me never?" to this man who's going away, and it sort of brought back. It's a song that for him brought back all these feelings about childhood and the sadness and stuff. And of course, he doesn't put together that, well, maybe his drug experience was precognizing that moment, or that was somehow informing, his experience with this powerful hallucinogen. I don't know. I mean, these are two examples, but it really makes me wonder how that yes, these substances are potentially very capable of inducing these kinds of experiences.
Cool. Very cool.
Where do you find yourself? You sound like, by the way, I've taken a few neuroscience classes, and you remind me of a lot of a neuroscientist.
I'm sorry, you
You
broke up there.
roboted. Yeah, sorry.
Could you
You
repeat what you just said?
you're reminding me. There's a lot of neuroscience that I'm picking up from you in modern neuroscience theory. Of course, the whole thing is pretty modern, but I want to ask where your ideas are in the process of death. Like, so within context to all this that you've laid out, what do you think goes on? What camp are you in? What are your theories? What are your ideas? What do you postulate?
Um, I I try not I try not to postulate. I don't know, and I don't. I certainly I'm hesitant to give any kind of opinion on that because we're all so biased that I don't think anyone can give an opinion on that that's not colored by their hopes.
It's a subjective answer. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, can't we? But that's where I like.
But I will say, what I was going to say though is that the hypothesis that I'm putting forward in my book, Time Loop, does not answer that question, and it does not, and in fact, it sort of presupposes um, a brain-based view of precognition.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not trying to answer any larger questions of what consciousness, is in some bigger sense, and I'm not trying to reduce it to the brain or whatever. But I do think that the contents of consciousness, which is our everything we know in our lives, everything we learn in our lives, and our experiences, I do think of that as rooted in the brain. I don't see that the evidence that's sometimes put forward um, for the survival of personality, you know, beyond bodily death and so forth,
Hmm.
I'm not compelled by that evidence. Uh, so my, generally my thinking is that, you know, even if even if there's some aspect of consciousness that's not reducible to the brain or whatever, uh, the contents of consciousness, and it's those contents that we're talking about with precognition.
Hmm.
Those I do think are dependent on the brain. Um, so
Yeah, that's why I'm saying when I kind of make an association with neuroscience and some of the things I'm hearing. Yeah, I've taken a few classes, a few neuroscience classes, because I find it all fascinating, and I try to not have conviction, and I really try to remain open with everything. And so, I don't like to hit my head
yeah,
on a wall.
yeah, right. Well, I'm not like I don't. Um, uh, I'm definitely, I'm the consciousness thing. I think is kind of I don't know.
Overused.
I think it's a
A
kind of
catch-all.
MacGuff. Well, it's a catch-all. It's poorly defined. No two people mean the same thing by the term, so it's just bound to get people to argue, and they're often arguing past each other because
Yes,
they're
yeah.
defining it in different ways. Um, uh, I just think it's kind of one of those unanswerable um, things. So, but I'm certainly open to various. I've been at various times. Depending on what time of the day you catch me, I might be a panentheist or whatever. I'm certainly. I'm not. I don't consider myself a neuroreductionist. But
Yeah.
but like you, I find neuroscience research very interesting. It's certainly, there's only so much it can tell us. I mean, I think neuroscience is really in its infancy
Yes, it
right
is, definitely.
now, and as much as we know about the brain, it's there's way more that we don't know and that we will be able to learn in the future with better imaging tools and the ability to study individual neurons and what's inside neurons and all. It's like our current tools are just very crude, I think, for understanding us as human beings. So it's like as long as you realize the limits of neuroscience, it can be very interesting. um, I think that a lot of a lot of people who study these questions of parapsychology and mysticism and paranormal like that tend to have this view of neuroscience and neuroscientists as these kind of bad guys who are trying to take all the mystery away from the world. I work with neuroscientists on a daily basis, and they're definitely not like that. I don't. Most aren't interested in these. They're not thinking about these questions. They're investigating you know, some little aspect of some certain kind of behavior or illness or whatever, and most aren't thinking about consciousness and how it reduces to brain function or whatever. That's not that's not a big thing for most neuroscientists,
But
I
if they
don't
could
think.
locate the synapse that fires when you blink your
Right,
right eye,
right,
boom,
right, right.
going right to the
Or
Pentagon.
all the fascinating stuff they're into, the ghosting aspect of people who've lost limbs,
Hmm.
earworms, and all that.
Sure,
There's so
sure.
much juiciness there to
Earworms.
explore,
Wait,
and
wait.
it is
Eric talked about earworms being a synchronistic something or other, or a precursor to a precog, or part of a precog dream.
Yeah, earworms are very very precognitively rich phenomena.
yes.
um, uh, they yeah, pay attention to your earworm. Right, yeah.
That's
Not only write down your dreams, write down your earworms, because they can be very valuable.
They have something to tell you. Sorry. I have a question when you're ready, Nigel.
Go, Jerry.
All right. This is long and complicated, but really good question. So, this I'm going to reference the Radio Mysterioso interview, basically because I just heard it today, and you don't remember it. So,
I do remember it, vaguely. But
you'll remember this part.
Greg a lot. He's really cool, but I don't remember what we specifically talked about.
Greg is awesome. I wish he was my neighbor.
Yeah, he is.
So, you guys were talking about dream imagery and how symbolic it is, and he made the statement that it was oblique.
Yeah, that's a great word. I love that yes.
I took issue with that word, really, because I think of it more as abstract than oblique. But that's just me. So you were talking about that and the symbols, and I couldn't help thinking about archetypes and how you didn't actually mention that they are just archetypes, perhaps, of whatever those things are, which then made me think about how archetypes and symbols are also sigils in like chaos magic or in magical operation, and how that programs your subconscious. So have you ever thought about the connections there between like sigil magic or even ritual magic to these kind of ideas of retrocausation and time loop?
Yeah, not much. I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I have a lot of friends who are, really interested in chaos magic, and I think it's a personality thing. I'm not someone who's interested in working. That kind of I don't know how to describe it. That kind of magical, working with one's intention or casting, using sigils and like that. Doesn't speak to me. I'm more of a Taoist kind of person who likes to watch what's going to happen and see things unfold. I think I resonate so well with the block universe view because I think my personality is being a spectator anyway. And so I'm a little superstitious actually about doing something that's going to set a certain intention, because I always assume it's going to backfire or work in some ironic way that I didn't want. And so my preference is to just sort of let things unfold. And I think that gets to the question of obliquity, because that's another word for oblique. Well, it also goes back to my interest in Freud, because this is sort of the basic premise of psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic theory, according to Freud, which is that the unconscious works in this oblique, indirect way, and that it has an ironic quality to it that's always subverting our conscious intention in some way. And now the reasons he gave for that, I don't agree with. I mean, he thought that we were constantly defending ourselves against repressed thoughts and repressed wishes. I disagree with that. I think that it's much more interesting that what he described is this kind of unconscious realm of defenses and oblique symbols was really precognition, and that there's a reason we can't understand it. It's because it's a relation to our future, and it's not the future yet, and so we're never going to understand things correctly from the viewpoint of some future time looking back. So there's this relation to our future self that's always going to be oblique or sort of awry. It's not going to be direct, and the more confidently we state the meaning of some dream or symbol or whatever in the present, the more we can be assured that we're going to look like fools the next day, when we look back on it in hindsight. And so that's kind of accounts for, I think, my superstition about intention setting and use of sigils and things like that. That kind of that sort of chaos magic approach to life. And I've had this conversation with a number of people because it's, I think it is a personality kind of trait.
Sure,
I think some
absolutely.
people, want to feel like they're taking control of their future. And I'm always superstitious about that. Somehow, like that's going to actually backfire in some unforeseen way.
And as long as you believe that, it probably always will.
Right, exactly. So I'm, locked.
So
I'm locked in.
I guess I didn't ask my question the right way. So these symbols that you would see in your dreams, this is where I'm going with this. You talk about these oblique imagery, this oblique symbology. I'm suggesting that they're programming you in a way that sigils program the universe for you. That they're not, I'm trying to make a correlation, not necessarily equal.
Yeah.
It could be just a communication system between whatever and you.
You sound like a crypto Jungian.
I don't know I'm not labeled. I can't label myself.
That's awesome.
But it could be if I knew what it meant.
That's, kind of the view. That's not too far from the view that's held by Jacques Vallée, actually, a great ufologist, and who has sort of a view of the universe as sort of built of information, and that we're constantly sort of programming it through our thoughts. And I think that would also probably go along with a lot of new thought, stuff. But it's a very interesting idea. I don't subscribe to it.
I'm definitely in that camp.
Yeah.
But it's cool.
Yeah. I think that that dream, symbology and so forth, symbolism reflects the oblique, to use that word again, the oblique way the information has to reach us in the past from a source in the future. Just to take one example, we couldn't have, you couldn't have a clear being a human being who believes in free will, like we all sort of do, as we go through life, we act as though we have free will. You couldn't have a very clear, vivid, precognitive dream of an outcome that you could take an action to prevent, like a bad outcome, that you could easily take an action to prevent. You're not going to have that dream. Instead, you're going to have, because if you took an action to prevent it, then that future wouldn't occur, and so you wouldn't have had the dream. So that's a paradox, right? So the only way,
unless the future's malleable.
Well, right, but then that opens up a lot of problems for thinking about the possibility of precognition. I argue that precognition is only possible because
of the glass.
The future is fixed. Yeah, and so in that case, then precognitive dreams are going to have this obliqueness to them. They're going to, you're not going to dream the exact outcome. You're going to dream something displaced in some way, and that's what Freud's work really mapped out brilliantly. Was the sort of ways information is displaced. Now, again, he thought it was because we were defending ourselves against some thought that we didn't want to have. The idea of repression. But I argue that no, it has to do with the fact that the unconscious is really consciousness displaced in time. And when you think about how information has to reflex backward in time and be meaningful, but without foreclosing foreseen outcome, then it starts to make a different kind of sense of Freudian dream symbolism. So that's my alternative take on that.
No, it's a great take. I love it.
Where do you stand on the whole ET phenomena?
You mean
extraterrestrial, like aliens, that kind of stuff.
Abductions, what?
Well, if you mean ufology or UFOs or
Well, but not
the
just the objects flying around, the things flying them around.
well, I don't know what to make of that. It was ufology that got me actually into this because originally I saw a couple of UFOs in 2009, and it's what sort of led me down the path to reading about, realizing that there were smart people who were actually writing about this stuff, including Jacques Vallée, who
Yes.
links UFOs to psychic phenomena. And I had never had any problem with the idea of UFOs. That didn't bother me, but I did have sort of a knee-jerk skepticism about ESP and psychic phenomena. So that it sort of troubled me that here's a smart person who's writing very seriously about ESP, and so that got me, reading that literature. And ultimately, I think, like a lot of people, I kind of gave up on ufology because it's such a murky, there's so much deception and manipulation and
It's a government-run program.
Well, there's everything. I mean, there's that. You don't know what the there is at the heart of it.
Exactly.
And so that's why I kind of went down the path of studying ESP. I've lately gotten back into the UFO stuff a bit, but there's so many aspects to the phenomenon, or the phenomena, I would say.
Well, it opens up that pathway of otherness. For me, it does, at least.
Sure, but how much of it is other, and how much of it is very human deception?
Well, in Jungian psychology, all otherness is you. So,
well, I certainly wouldn't want to reduce UFO phenomenon to reflections of our own unconscious. I mean, I think that I do think there's a there, but what is it? ETs? Is it interdimensional beings? That's what Jacques Vallée would say. Is it time travelers? I mean, I think time travel is something that has not been looked at.
No,
it has. It really has.
It has. It's there, and it seems to me one of the more logical, or at least reasonable explanations for a lot of the phenomena we observe.
Yeah,
non-physical.
And any number of explanations. So but what? And I don't know if anyone has any clue.
What she was really asking is, do you believe they're coming in spaceships from outer space?
No, but I think the idea that probably the whole universe is swarmed with drones is probably a pretty realistic idea, and it may not even account for many UFO encounters. I mean, many UFO encounters could be something completely different, but the idea that we live in a kind of surveillance universe, is I think I don't think there's any reason to doubt that. So that could be part of it too. I think there's multiple phenomena going on.
Yeah, totally. That would explain the missing dark matter.
Good.
Yes.
All
those drones.
Well, you and Jerry both had the UFO experience where it kind of changed both of you have like a paradigm shifting experience around it. So that's why I thought it was interesting, because Jerry wasn't on any of this at all until he had his experience.
What did you see?
An orange orb.
Me too.
About the size of a quarter.
Holy shite.
Well, it's not the first coincidence that we've had. But it was over not in my backyard, but was over my neighbor's house across my yard. And I got pictures of it, and made a MUFON report and all that.
Oh yeah, I made a MUFON on mine too. Mine was farther away, and I had a flip cam, and I tried to film it, and it didn't come out in the flip cam. But I did make a MUFON report, and but it wasn't. It was very strange. It wasn't, by itself, it wasn't life altering for me, but it led me to read about UFOs, and that was, I guess, more life altering, I suppose. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I got a question here from Oswald. He wants to know who your favorite sci-fi writers were, past or present.
Well, I'm a big fan of Phil Dick. I'm a big fan of Stanislaw Lem, the Polish writer who wrote Solaris and a number of other really, really great novels. I'm a big fan of the Strugatsky brothers, the Russian brothers who wrote Roadside Picnic. It was the novel that was sort of adapted by Andrei Tarkovsky and made into the movie Stalker. Their stuff is really cool. I'd say those are probably, I'm sure there's someone like I'm forgetting, but those would be my top three.
He said, "Fuck yeah, Stanislaw Lem."
Yeah, Lem is really, really, really amazing, and I wish more people knew his work.
Do you give any time? I know everyone's busy, but do you give any time to some of the modern sci-fi that is? Sorry, my cats.
No piano yet.
Not on the piano yet. Some of the modern sci-fi shows that are out there that, I mean, I think there's just some phenomenal shows out there.
I unfortunately just don't watch TV. I just don't have time. It's just, I know there's a lot of, I know we're in like a golden age of television, and I just don't unfortunately have the time to watch anything.
Yeah, that's why I figured you just seem really, really busy, especially with the baby in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
A baby at 50, that takes balls.
Luckily, my wife is a little younger than
me. We are in a golden age, though, Eric. There's some. I mean, I lament the fact that some of these really great stories were not around in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
That I could have chewed on. Although some of it's just rehashed good stuff from these great old writers.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's actually derivative of
what?
Of the stories that have been told already. And so with a little bit the text there to show some of the strangeness, the high strangeness in a good way.
I do watch Black Mirror.
Black Mirror is great. Fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm thinking on that level though of really great stuff.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's a great show, and that sort of brings Phil Dick up to date. Yeah.
You got to wonder too how much creativity is gotten through this precognition mechanism.
Well, this is what I'm writing about right now. This is my second book. Probably is going to be about.
What a great segue.
It's yes. I think that this is the mechanism of creativity. So yeah, I could talk at length about this, but the more you study, I mean, my book, I packed in a lot of examples of writers, who, had precognitive experiences and so forth. But I think that when you drill down and look at really genius writing, I think it's the basic mechanism behind all creativity. But we have because certain works of high genius or whatever tend to have be encrusted with lots of history and backstory and the writers, journals and letters, all that. We can sort of piece together how precognition feeds into the story of artistic creation in some of these cases, and there are a lot of them. And anyway, this is what I'm very excited to write about.
Right. I'm looking forward to reading that for sure. I have had similar thoughts. That's all I got, Nish.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right.
I got my death questions usually my last.
I know.
The death thing.
I know. All right. So thank you, Eric, so much. Do you want to plug anything other than the book you're working on?
Well, no, that's still a long way off from being published, but I'll plug my current book, which is Timeloops, and my blog, which is called the Nightshirt.com. It's all one word, the Nightshirt.com. So I write about this. I don't write very frequently, but I write at length when I write. so there's a lot of stuff there that's not in the book. But this has been great. This has been a really fun conversation.
Well, thank you for joining us. And anyone listening, the links to everything that Eric just mentioned, plus links to his website and whatnot and Twitter account, are all in the show notes for everyone.
And I highly recommend his book, Timeloops. Amazing. It's just really, it's amazing. I think it's going to age well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I hope so.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Eric, again. Thanks, Nish. Thanks, everyone in the chat. And be sure to tune in next week. We'll have another author, Peter Moon, the Montauk Project. So that should be interesting. So everyone have a good night. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.